This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with art collector and facilitator Twobadour, who along with business partner Metakovan became the subject of headlines worldwide this past March when the pair purchased Beeple's first 5,000 days at a Christie's auction for $69 million. Twobadour discusses his background, his journey into crypto, the ability of NFTs to undo colonial damage, and what the future holds. At the end of the episode, I'll be taking a look at some of the week's top art headlines. But first up, what comes after the first 5,000 days? With Twobadour. Twobadour, I'm thrilled to have you as a guest on the podcast today. I gather that 6 years ago, you wouldn't have anticipated being where you are today. And so I was wondering if we could start with maybe you describing your crypto journey.
Well, first off, thank you for having me, Craig. And it's a weird story in a sense. My crypto story, from many perspectives, at least from the conventional way people look at crypto, it is a series of missed opportunities. Because I was first introduced to Bitcoin in 2013, very generously, I might add, by Metakovan, who discovered it himself. I was a journalist back then, and Metakovan, who was an app developer in Chennai. So he and I were working on a project together, and he discovered Bitcoin, and he told me all about it, and it flew right over my head. And that package of information that he shared with me was enough to give him wings and to set him off on a journey of entrepreneurship and discovery all over the world. And me, on the other hand, it left me completely unaffected. And it would be years, about 4 years, before we sort of found each other again and decided to work together on something. And Metakovan and I, we worked on a DeFi protocol for a little bit. I dove right into DeFi from 2017 onwards, which was an interesting time to get into crypto because it was right at the brink of a precipice from which crypto fell and didn't wake up for 2 years. So it's a nice leap of faith and also a good litmus test. Just to complete the loop, I finally found my groove only at the beginning of the pandemic when I discovered the NFT space. And this makes a lot of sense because this also speaks to the power of the phenomenon of NFTs themselves, because crypto as by itself is abstract, it's hard to understand, and it's accessible mostly to people who either know how to code or who are very comfortable with financial instruments. NFTs, on the other hand, suddenly make all of those abstract concepts of independent, financial independence, or the idea of immutability, and all of those things more vivid and visible. And I think the reason we're seeing this massive influx of people and interest in artists and creatives is that fact. And my own story is a perfect illustration.
Before you and Metakovan got together to create Metapurse, what exactly was your background?
Well, I was a journalist for about 8 years, the first 8 years of my career, because it felt obvious at the time, because the only thing I didn't absolutely suck at was communication, was being able to write. It's something I enjoyed. I sort of gravitated towards it. It took me 8 years to figure out that journalism as such was not my calling, but communications was. And I meandered my way through advertising, through writing about supply chain finance. Inexplicably, I spent 6 months researching and writing about cargo trucks. I don't know, it's a complete waste of my time, but there you have it. Before I stumbled upon crypto. The thing is, the idea is that the more I learned about money, the more socially and politically aware I became, the more crypto started to make sense.
So for my listeners who aren't familiar with Metapurse, how would you describe your organization and its mission?
It's something we think about constantly. The organization itself is pretty simple. It's kind of a straightforward thing. It began as a way to consolidate our intentions in this space. That's how I can put it like fairly accurately. Um, Metakovan had started collecting NFTs from since 2017 itself, but I think we sort of put a name to it in September of 2020. Because by then I had sort of had my own parallel journey as Twobadour in the metaverse, and we discovered over time that the way we look at NFTs sort of converged at a certain point, and we decided to form Metaverse to see how we can engage with this new phenomenon, with this renaissance as we saw it. And so Metaverse does a whole lot of things, but the idea is sort of twofold. At the most obvious level, it is an experiment in trying to engage with this renaissance. How do we be part of it? How do we, empower it, drive it, and empower the right people in it? And the other, I suppose, the larger goal for us is to serve the cause of decoloniality. It's an idea propounded by the Walter Mignolo, but it is something that we identify with very strongly.
So that brings up a good point. When I saw you and Metakovan speak at NFT NYC, I feel like you two were laying out kind of a unique vision for Metapurse in honestly a new worldview. Most people that day were on stage talking about superhero collectibles and sports card NFTs, but you two started talking about Walter Mignolo and folks like Alfredo Jar. Can you talk a little bit more about decoloniality and how that integrates with Metapurse's mission?
I mean, it is the culmination of years of, empirical experience as well, right? Our own personal story in the world and in the space. It just so happens that Walter Mignolo helped us give some sort of give us a word for it and some sort of structure to what we want to do in the world. Decoloniality, I suppose the simplest way to describe it would be it's like unless your culture or your identity or your art can be described or expressed in one of 5 European languages, it is not considered culture or art. It just doesn't exist in the world. And India, where we come from, is a country of many countries. And the India that you see or the West experiences is not something even I can relate to, right? Because Bollywood is not me. I mean, chicken tikka masala is not me. Hindi is not me. I speak a language. I grew up in a culture which is currently being systematically sort of smothered in this wave of homogeneity and authoritarianism, which frankly is rampant not just in India but all across the world, right? So decoloniality is the idea of I wouldn't say changing the balance, but bringing to the fore or bringing to the surface cultures which existed before, the original wave of coloniality sort of smothered them, and also which the current wave of neocoloniality is sort of again threatening to smother them and into extinction, basically. So, I mean, it all sounds a little bit dark, but the light at the end of the tunnel and the happy accident is that this idea of decoloniality happens to be best served by the NFT renaissance, which is effectively, an opportunity for the global South to express itself culturally, rather than purely on ideological terms or on verbal terms or in a sort of angry manner, if you know what I mean. right? The anger or the frustration is inevitable. It's perfectly understandable. But what we've realized is that it might not be entirely necessary, and it might not be the best vehicle to to express yourself in. I mean, art does it much better. Music is way more rugged in such environments. For instance, even at Dreamverse, right? I mean, two aspects of it, which I thought made the whole experience worth it, were one, the live drawing performance by the Dada Art Collective. I mean, it apart from amazing people like Judy Ma'am or Sparrow, it included three people from Latin America who had never been to the US before. That's, I mean, it's just amazing. And what they created, sort of, it spoke to everybody that walked through those halls. And similarly, this Pradeep Kumar, who's from where I'm from, and his collective of artists, they performed live at Dreamverse because they created the soundscape of the whole thing. And what Pradeep and his 42 band of 42 artists, from the hinterland of South India, and what Dada created proved beyond doubt that to be able to appreciate decolonial art or culture, you need not necessarily have some sort of a shared point of reference in that culture. You just drop it in an interesting place, and people will still enjoy it because art speaks a language like which doesn't require languages. Basically, it hits you at something at a part of yourself that's pure and something that is unsullied by context. Does that make sense?
In the days following Metaverse's acquisition of, the Beeple NFT, the big one, it seems that, part of the messaging I was hearing from you was that crypto allows for true decentralization and erasure of geographic power centers. And so by buying such a historic piece at such a historic price, you were kind of intending to challenge preconceptions about South Asian capabilities. Did I get that right? Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that. But what we discovered later on, I mean, first off, yes, while that might not have been our original intention when we went into the auction, because it couldn't have been, right? Because even we had no idea that it would go all the way to $60 million. I mean, there was no, the only thing we worked towards as we walked into that auction was to make sure Christie's didn't give us some sort of a ceiling on how much we could spend. But otherwise, we had no grand intentions or to sort of signal this message. It was more a realization than an intention towards that auction. So yes, in a sense, when you think of accomplishment, when you think of taste making in the world, the palette is usually monochrome. It's usually Caucasian. So it must have come as a surprise to a lot of people, and it did. And we did have some interesting and very mixed reactions. I mean, questions about the legitimacy of the sale itself, which is funny because I mean, Christie's is probably the most legitimate platform there is when it comes to art sale, historically speaking. I mean, I'm sure many blockchain-based platforms can and do give them a run for their money when it comes to privacy, and when it comes to arbitrary ceilings on how much a person can spend on their platform. But there you have it. So there were questions about the legitimacy of the sale. There were questions about whether it was art or not. There were very serious questions about our own legitimacy as people, whether we were genuine, whether we were scammers, and so on and so forth. But these are mostly expressions of disbelief that someone that looked or talked like us could do something of the kind that we did. So yes, it is very much a message. But post the Beeple incident, as we call it, and what we also realized is that it paints a very one-dimensional picture, not just of what happened, but also of us our intentions in the space, right? And it's difficult to move away from that narrative. There is no room for nuance. All you see is a massive number, $69 million, and that that almost overwhelming collage of work. That's it. So all of our ideas of decoloniality of what we want to do through metaverse in the world, they sort of get lost in that noise. And we found that it's it's been a sort of a little anticlimactic in that sense, right? I mean, we are happy about the access that it opened up, about the doors that it kicked open for us, because we wouldn't have had many of the relationships which we now like cherish, seriously cherish. I mean, some of them are the biggest artists in the world, which is what we always wanted to do. Some of them are relationships with creatives, with entrepreneurs that we have now begun to enjoy working with, would not have happened without the Beeple piece. But on the other hand, it also opened up, it signaled something that did not and that never will sort of represent who we are. It signaled that we might be these hype masters of the NFT space. And I mean, I'm sure you among many people were surprised at what we spoke about at NFT NYC, right? I mean, these don't look like the kind of people that would speak about Walter Mignolo or Alfredo Jar. I mean, someone who's inspired by them doesn't necessarily go and spend $69 million on a work of art. So we're sort of trying to counterbalance that narrative, which we sort of created for ourselves inadvertently.
Do you feel like some of the skepticism when the Beeple incident first occurred may have had to do something with the fact that your identities weren't revealed right away? And when the identities were revealed, we're talking about pseudonyms. And I feel like in the crypto world, people are comfortable with the pseudonyms and the screen names. But in the legacy art world, that could be confusing. Could you maybe talk about the significance of your pseudonym and why you use it?
Sure, Craig. I mean, that was deliberate. It was part of it. And I don't think the conventional art world is necessarily uncomfortable with pseudonyms, because many of the biggest sales are anonymous, right? I mean, a mystery buyer bought this piece for 10 million or 20 or whatever. So it's not uncommon that way. It's funnily enough, anonymity people are okay with. Pseudonymity, not so much. In spite of it being like a very widespread phenomenon. I mean, think about it for a second. Every time you log into a social network or you sign up for a game on Xbox or PS4 or whatever, the first thing you do is to create an avatar, right? But the problem is when you do it in crypto, it is either infantilized or vilified. So we sort of wanted to break that mold a little bit and to give people a sense that pseudonymity is not necessarily a cover or something that you're hiding behind, because it doesn't have to be. I mean, our own pseudonyms were never airtight, were never meant to be. Anybody with an internet connection would have doxed us and did eventually. Because we work on the same things that Metakovan and Twobadour work on the same things that Anand and Vignesh did, for instance. So it was easy, but it was more a sort of a commentary on the power of pseudonyms. I mean, for me personally, and even for Metakovan, what pseudonyms did was to give us a non-judgmental runway into this new world of NFTs, which is unheard of, right? When, as Twobadour, I was able to exist for 6 months, and it was thrilling, right? I couldn't bring any baggage, any of my previous so-called accomplishments or credentials into this new space. But at the same, and I had to live off of my current talents. I mean, meager as they might be. But on the other hand, there was no baggage. There was no point of reference for the people that were interacting with me, except for that one conversation they were having with me, right? Which I thought was thrilling, which was honest, which was refreshing. And that runway did so much to sort of infuse my own sense of, infuse me with a sense of self-worth, which I might not have had before, and also a confidence in what I could do in this new space. So, in that way, I think pseudonyms have been incredibly helpful. to us personally, and I think will be for a lot of people of color or people that are not entirely comfortable in their own skin. So, to cut a long story short, yes, I do think there is a lot of stigma attached to pseudonymity in the world, which might have been one of the reasons for the skepticism. But the reason we went with it is because of our own empirical experience with pseudonymity.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about Beeple. I mean, even before the first 5,000 days, you guys had launched a fund called B20, which was set up to purchase Beeple works. What is it about Beeple's artwork that attracted you and Metakovan?
Well, a correction, Craig. B20 is not a fund to purchase people's artworks. It's a very simple project in fractionalized ownership. This was in December 2020, and Metakovan had this idea of buying out an entire collection from a Beeple drop. It's frankly a ridiculous notion because to be able to acquire 20 pieces over 2 days on an open auction is unheard of. It's never been done before, and it will never happen again because the place is simply too big now. But we managed to do it, and we did it because we had a clear idea of what we wanted to do with art. That's the crux of the whole experiment, right? I mean, the only way people know to interact with art is to flip it for a higher price, and two is to sort of lock it up somewhere. The third option, which we wanted to explore, was to share ownership of a work of art and to display it in public, which is how it was done prehistorically almost. So what we did with these 20 editions of the Beeple 20, as it was called, was to build museums for it in the metaverse across CryptoVoxels and Sandbox and Somnium Space and Decentraland. I mean, Sandbox was an open then, but the other three places. We installed these 20 works of art in them. We bundled the whole thing, and we fractionalized the ownership of this entire bundle into these B20 tokens. So it's very simple. It's almost like owning a piece of the MoMA as you walk into it, right? So you don't own a particular work of art, but you own a piece of the entire experience. That's what the B20 token and the project represent.
I think I got the order backwards. I in my mind, the B20 tokens were launched to fund the acquisition, but the B20 tokens were launched post-acquisition to provide fractionalized ownership to whoever had interest in the collection. Does that sound right?
The collection and the whole experience, basically. The B20 bundle also includes a sort of an original video, a soundscape by Blau at that point, who also helped perform it. It includes the architectural designs of those museums. It includes the actual builds themselves, and it includes also, the actual 20 pieces. So it's not just the 20 works of art which were, which we acquired for about $2.2 million. But also all of these other assets which make up the experience, for which we spent an additional $500,000.
The Beeple's first 5,000 days, in the weeks following the sale, there were those who combed through all 5,000 images and made note of a number of works that were, let's say, troubling. And some were considered misogynistic. Some said there were pieces that were racist. How would you respond to those critics?
It's interesting, right? I mean, I have had several conversations about this, but we always looked at it from two perspectives. One, it might feel counterintuitive, but the fact is, what appealed to us most about Beeple, the artist, was Beeple, the person. His almost spiritual level of consistency to creating art every day for art's sake, right? I mean, nobody has that kind of consistency, that kind of commitment. I mean, people. I myself have skipped showering over the course of 5 years, at least a couple of times, right? There is nothing any of us do which happens every day, right? And so this is This we felt was a powerful metaphor for a digital generation, which said, you can start anywhere, you can get better at something, like gradually and very visibly better at something, and you hit the end of the rainbow, whether it's at the end of a year or 5 or 13. Right? So that's we thought that was an amazing metaphor, and that's what appealed to us most about Beeple, the fact that he put himself out there, his progress or lack thereof, every day for people to see, and he did get better visibly as an artist. So that's what appealed to us. To address the elephant in the room, the individual pictures themselves. I've felt two things about it. One, it's not my business to censor what an artist puts out. But two, I had this feeling that Beeple is more a conduit for the social and cultural excesses of his times, rather than an advocate of what those images represent. Yes, there is misogyny in it. There is, an excess. There is hyperbole in it. But he's more, a cartoonist that reflects the influences around him on a daily basis, rather than someone who, actually sort of advocates for misogyny. Because I've met the man, and he's not a misogynist. It doesn't feel like it.
Sure. And I believe he was at Dreamverse, right?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah, can you kind of describe what Dreamverse is and how that event came off this year?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, we never fully finished thinking about how we could experience NFTs, right? I mean, this current boom in the space that we're experiencing is all about collecting or acquiring NFTs. I think the real boom will happen when people figure out how to experience and enjoy their NFTs. And Dreamverse is one of those, early. And, B20 was one such experiment. And Dreamverse is a very real sort of physical experiment in experiencing NFTs. Because, physical art is not digital art, obviously, but digital art can be expressed in physical spaces. And it was so exciting to be able to do that, to be able to experiment with it at Dreamverse. So Dreamverse is basically, the way we look at it is what happens when this abstract virtual idea of NFTs makes landfall. And it did make landfall in New York. It had two aspects to it. One was the Dreamverse Gallery, which consisted of works from 162 artists, NFT artists. That itself was incredible to me, because it was purely based on the relationship that we were able to build with artists. It was purely based on artists themselves being comfortable with the vibe of Metaverse, with what we represent in the space. And we are immensely grateful that they said yes, all 162 of them. And out of them, 40 of the artists are from Timepieces, the initiative by the Time magazine, the Time group. And the latter half of Dreamverse was an EDM party, because we just wanted to create a collective experience, basically, through the gallery as well. I mean, one of the things with digital art is that, yes, you can look at it on your phone, but the experience is different when you're looking at it on, say, a 10-foot screen with 20 others, right? So that's what that sort of moment of magic and serendipity is what we want to create. The Dreamverse Gallery also, like we spoke about a little earlier, had this live drawing performance by the Dada Art Collective. It had a live soundscape by the Pun Collective from the south of India, and a whole bunch of artists that are not in the limelight currently, or are not that famous, because we left the curation to 10 artists instead of trying to do it ourselves. That was one of my earlier concerns. I did not want to curate anything. My sensibilities are very limited, so I didn't want to do that. So we reached out to 10 of the OG NFT artists like Sparrow, Josie Bellini, Skeeny, Metageist, and a few others, and they did the curation. They chose 10 artists that they admired in the space, that they thought were interesting or promising, which led to this incredible variance in the kind of artists that we were able to showcase at Dreamverse. So I'm very proud of the gallery itself and how we pulled it off. And the party was basically an EDM concert with some very interesting performers. We had Please and Thank You. We had Alesso as the headline performer. We had Matthew Bentley. So it was very interesting. And as part of it, we also launched a couple of things. We had one, an experimental experience by Carsten Hohler called Seven Hertz. So that was an interesting experience as well. And we also sort of made a hat tip to the Beeple 5000 because that kind of started all of it. So the only version of the Beeple 5000 that we've seen so far is that collage, right? Which is frankly kind of overwhelming and very underserved in terms of detail. So we had like a 2.5 minute video where it zoomed in and out of key elements, which sort of traced Beeple's own journey through some of the motifs that he used in these works of art. So this was Dreamverse. It was an experiment in experiencing NFTs in the physical world.
So is this going to be an annual event? Do you think that it will continue to coincide with NFT NYC, or do you think it would be something that will take place more frequently, will move around the world? What do you think? What's the future of Dreamverse?
It's definitely going to be an annual event. I'm not entirely sure it might always sort of tail NFT NYC. Maybe it might tail DevCon, I don't know, or something. But it most definitely will be an annual event. And I also foresee it having a lot of satellite events sort of spread throughout the year because, it just feels like it. I think we ought to have smaller pockets and experiments of Dreamverse itself, which all culminate into this big annual event in New York. That's kind of how I see it in my head. But it's some version of it or versions of it will definitely happen every year.
So, in your opinion, what makes a good piece of crypto art? What do you think?
It's interesting. Okay. I think it's the same as asking what makes a good piece of art, right? It's whatever moves you, whatever speaks to you is good art. It's as simple as that. I mean, if you're asking me from the perspective of an investor, I wouldn't be able to tell you because of Metakovan, thanks to him, I've had the privilege of never looking at art as an investment, but rather as a vehicle for a story, as a vehicle for an intention in the space. And that's how I will always continue to look at it. So even the way we've collected art over time has I think evolved. You add layers of context, both historical and about the artists themselves, to your own experience of being able to buy art. In many ways, I sort of regret having lost that initial freshness, maybe, of being like completely overwhelmed and of not knowing what I'm looking at. I don't think I will ever regain that feeling. But on the other hand, I'm immensely grateful for the relationships that I've formed with artists, which I think is unique to the NFT space. Like you can actually have a dialogue with the artist. And I think to sum it up, a good piece of crypto art is your ability to the ability of of connection, of you being able to connect with the work of art, and then being able to extend that connection to the artist also. To be able to complete that loop is what makes a work of art like truly good.
Sure. So do you feel like you have sensed a change in your taste over the last, say, year and a half, as you've looked at more and more work Do you feel like your taste is refined, or
Oh,
what do you think?
I wouldn't. Yeah, it definitely has changed. I wouldn't use the word defined, essentially, but it has evolved into something, and it continues to. I just hope, for the better, in a sense. But yes, it definitely has changed.
So, what do you see in store for the future of the NFT space? What do you think's on the horizon?
Oh, so much, so much. I mean, there is a larger vision, and I think uh, it will address the collective good eventually, but it's going to be incremental. It's going to be over a period of time. Now, I'm speaking of this in abstract and not specifically in terms of projects that are out there, because I think that's important as well. Because there are very powerful forces, very powerful trends that that people tend to FOMO over, and it's very difficult not to feel that feeling of FOMO, right? But I think they will give way to initiatives and ideas and projects that have a much more long-term vision, even within the NFT space. And it's hard to do that because in a space that changes and evolves so quickly, to come up with an idea or a concept that can sort of subsume any current trend that so happens to come about and sort of hold its own is rare. And I think projects of that sort, which are determinedly decentralized, which are determinedly long term in their vision, which have a certain percentage of ambiguity in how they will unfold, which don't necessarily fill a vacuum that exists right now, but address a sort of a necessity which will arise a year from now or two, will be very interesting. And I think that's what the NFT space has in store for us. I also think there will be a larger realization of the actual potential of NFTs in being time capsules and vehicles for culture, and as the probably the best archival tools that ever existed in human history, which haven't happened yet. And the third aspect that I see unfolding in front of us is this idea of collectively experiencing NFTs in interesting and different ways. Dreamverse is just the beginning of it, right? So people know that you can experience a work of art on massive screens, that you can experience it collectively, that you can look at it on you can make a spectacle out of it, you can make it immersive, and you can do it in a physical space. So there's going to be a lot more of that also, I think.
And so, what about roadblocks? What hurdles do you think will need to be overcome for the space to reach its full potential?
I don't see any roadblocks as such, Greg, to be honest. It's just that everything has a certain cycle time, right? Everything has a time to unfold. I mean, there are a variety of factors involved, of course. I mean, some of them are the speed at which the technology itself grows. For instance, I mean, the first time I think people spoke about scaling on Ethereum was in 2017. The first time I heard it, anyway, it was a massive discussion at Token Summit in 2017. And the feeling and the mood at the time was scaling was imminent. It could arrive any day over the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and we're still waiting for it. So sometimes technology doesn't catch up with the enthusiasm of the collective. Some of the roadblocks might be regulatory, but I think if you really think about it and open your eyes to what's in front of you, it's a matter of time. There are no real roadblocks as such, but just it's all part of the process.
And so, Twobadour, I really appreciate your time. If my listeners wanted to follow your work there at Metapurse, support your work, how's the best way for them to keep track?
Well, we're always available on Twitter at Metaverse at Twobadour, but we are still getting better at trying to talk about ourselves. So if you are looking for a place where you can find where you want to find our story, where you want to discover our story, it really doesn't exist. I can't point you to a single resource. Maybe this podcast is an excellent place to start.
Sure.
But that's something that will happen over a period of time. But if you want to follow what we're doing, feel free to follow Metaverse. Feel free to subscribe to our Substack, which is a good set of blogs, which you'll find interesting. We do a weekly sort of Twitter Spaces or a Clubhouse thing called NFT Radio, which we want to sort of amp up over a period of time. That's interesting. And if you look at the archives on NFT Radio, especially post the Beeple sale, you can find some of the most amazing conversations with the smartest people in the NFT space, really. So those are all interesting resources I can point you to.
Well, Twobadour, I can't wait, a year or two down the line when I have a fractional ownership in an Alfredo jar NFT that you somehow bring.
Amen, Greg. Amen.
All right. Well, I tell you what, I again really appreciate your time and your willingness to be open and transparent and enlightening about where you guys have come from and the vision of decoloniality and a new world out there ahead of us. And so I really appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, Greg. This was a pleasure. I'm glad we ran into each other at NFT NYC.
Absolutely. Me too. Now, the news. April 15th, 2019. What could be worse than having to file your taxes? How about having to file your taxes while watching live footage from Paris of a massive fire laying waste to the Cathedral Notre Dame? The iconic French Gothic structure has been at the center of Paris's identity for 800 years and is currently in the middle of a massive restoration project that will replace huge sections of the structure that were destroyed by the fire. Most catastrophic of the damage were the enormous wooden beams that held up the church's roof and supported the massive lead-coated spire that towered 315 feet above Paris. Architects are taking great care to reconstruct these areas using period-correct materials and techniques. To do so, France went hunting for tall, straight, sturdy trees. They found their trees in France's Forêt de Berce. France began harvesting 1,000 of these massive 230-year-old oaks in March of this year, some of which will be capable of making beams as long as 60 feet. The trees are all currently in an 18-month drying process necessary before they can be cut into beams. Meanwhile, plans are being made that would reimagine the interior of the cathedral, plans that are garnering a fair amount of criticism. Some critics are even comparing the proposed changes to something Disney would dream up, and in case you're wondering, that's not a compliment. The art newspaper recently published an article that provided a succinct description of what has people at odds. And I'll read you a segment. Although the project has not been formally announced, Father Gilles Drouin provided an overview during an online conference in May for the General Secretariat of Catholic Education in France, which has been posted on YouTube. Last Friday, the British conservative newspaper The Telegraph denounced the reimagined Notre Dame as a politically correct Disneyland and an experimental showroom. Father Drouin, the director of the Liturgical Institute of Paris, said during the presentation that he was chosen 2 years ago by the Archbishop of Paris, Michael Alpetit, to revamp the inner space of the cathedral. He proposes a sound and light trail along the side chapels, providing a fruitful dialogue with contemporary art. He plans to replace the straw chairs, which occupy 80% of the space, with luminous mobile benches. Most of these could be removed during weekdays to leave more room for visitors. Altars in the chapel would also be displaced, and only 4 confessionals maintained on the ground floor. Drouin explained that Notre Dame was not adapted to cope with large numbers of tourists, which rose to 12 million before the cathedral was devastated by fire in 2019. Visitors come for different reasons, most of them from non-Christian or post-Christian cultures. So the chapels, some of which could be renamed after Asia, Africa, and other themes, should display multiple offerings, such as light projections of Bible quotes in foreign languages, including Chinese. Drouin showed designs featuring a stained glass window in a chapel wall covered in contemporary abstract paintings of clouds. So, what is most confusing in this text is the conflict in visions for the architecture and the interior. Painstaking care is being taken to restore the cathedral's architecture to its historical design, while a separate team has been charged with making the interior space more contemporary. It's unclear how many people want to go to a historical monument to experience a contemporary space. And there are considerations as to whether the interior should be considered a sacred space or a tourist destination. Paris-based architect Maurice Cullot, the author of several books on religious architecture in the 18th century, has plenty to say about the proposed changes. He says, "It does not make any sense. We're rebuilding the cathedral and the spire as it was, with ancient materials like stone, wood, and lead, and now we'll have a theme park for foreign tourists inside. Why wasn't the design entrusted to the same architects to maintain unity between the inside and outside of the building? How could a priest choose, on his own, the interior decoration of a cathedral that belongs to the universal heritage of humanity and is being rebuilt with donations coming from all over the world?" The Rijksmuseum, the National Museum of the Netherlands, is planning the largest exhibit of Vermeer paintings to date. It's anticipated that the exhibit will include 23 paintings by the master of the Dutch Golden Age. This might not sound massive, but consider that we can only identify 35 paintings as being crafted by Johan Vermeer. The story of Vermeer is a rather mysterious one. We don't know that much about him. He didn't paint that many pieces. He was not especially appreciated in his time. He was lost to the margins of art history before being rediscovered with great enthusiasm 250 years later in the 1800s. And the story only gets more odd. Painting has always been a skill passed down through studios and apprenticeships. It appears Vermeer's father was an art dealer, but there's no indication that Vermeer studied painting under anyone's tutelage. It's hard to imagine a self-taught artist being able to render the near photorealistic scenes that Vermeer captures. And what's most amazing to me, a painter, is what we see when Vermeer's paintings are X-rayed. X-raying and spectral analysis is common when trying to authenticate a painting. The X-ray image provides a vivid detail of the drawing at the heart of a painting. If a painting is an original, there's not only the drawing that matches the painting exactly, but also indications of where the artist changed his or her mind and edited his original concept. Art forgeries, on the other hand, typically don't exhibit these traits because forgeries are typically painted as copies. So the painting is planned ahead of time with no deviation. So back to the Vermeer. What does the drawing look like under a Vermeer? Nothing. The X-rays show no preliminary drawings, no signs of construction. It's as if Vermeer applied colors onto the surface like a laser printer. If I've piqued your curiosity, I'd suggest seeing the excellent documentary Tim's Vermeer. The movie is an engrossing chronicle of a person who finds clues, forms a hypothesis, and films himself undertaking an experiment unlike anything I've ever seen. You can rent or purchase it on Amazon Prime in case you grow tired of sappy Hallmark holiday movies this Christmas season. That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to ArtSense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe, and while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. If you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read a transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to canvia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@canvia.art. Thanks for listening.